Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Minister and the Chief Whip for facilitating the time to have this important debate on the economy. Um, I've been talking previously about the importance of having an open budgetary process, and when you look at the work this government has done since it came into power, it's been more transparent than any previous government in terms of the information that's been given out and the details and the plan, I suppose, for the economy, for Ireland, and where we hope to go in the next 3 to 5 years. But still, I think we can do better, and I think we should be benchmarking ourselves against best practice in other countries where they might have a budgetary committee that would sit on throughout the year, looking at different issues. If you take the debate that we've had in this chamber over the last number of days and the different ideas that have been brought to the table, that's exactly what a budgetary committee would be for, where people could come with their ideas, debate them, have them fully costed, and have them on the table so that there'd be a clear understanding of what Measure A would achieve or what Measure B would bring in tax, or how it might help the economy. And I think we'd all benefit as members of the Dáil from a process like that was open, and that did go on throughout the year. And that is, as we have it in the programme for government, and I'm hoping that this can be the beginning or the continuation of what the government has started into something, again, more detailed and more open next year as we approach the budget for 2014. Related to that is a bill that I published earlier this year called the Tax Transparency Bill. And I think it's relevant to this debate as well, because while we as members of the Dáil will be quite well informed of the details of the budget and things that are happening and the different possibilities that are there in relation to taxation and cutting and expenditure, the general public may not be as informed, and the general public may not be as clear as to what the government is in fact doing with their money. And the purpose of the Tax Transparency Bill was to allow the Minister, if you like, with each budget, each person who pays taxes would be sent a statement detailing what taxes they would then be paying for the following year and how those taxes would be spent in euros and cents across the different departments and according to the different programs in each department, so people could see actually where their money was going. I think the benefit of that would be that it would bring people closer into the process, and they could see then the value of the money that they're giving in taxes and how it does help people in social protection, how it does pay teacher salaries and everything else. It also might just bring into, I suppose, starker relief the challenge facing us in terms of the correction and the deficit that we need to make, but also the debt that we face. And if you were able to look at that figure in terms of how it is proportioned per person, it would also, I think, bring that challenge that we all face into closer relief. And I think as well then, when we then talk about the different choices facing us, people could actually see what a government was doing with their own money. And if they were saying, look, our priority as a government is education, they could see that reflected in their tax transparency statement that they would get, that they could see that shift in spending going, say, from education, increasing year on year, or whatever the difference might be. So I would ask, as part of this process, that the Minister consider that bill. I know the UK are going to adopt something like this in 2014. Their budget is in March. I think if we could link in with their officials, we have good relationships with the UK, we could study what they were doing so that once they moved to do it in 2014 in March, we could do the same thing in the same year at the end of the year. We've had growth this year for the first time in a number of years, and that's incredibly positive. I think that's got to be at the core of everything we discuss, that the economy is growing. And that's a positive. Deputy Lord talked about the basic increase in employment that we need to make each year just to keep our head above water. But in fact, if we want to take people off the live register, we have to make an even bigger increase than that. And growth gives us a platform for that. Of course, we need to grow more. The domestic economy is where growth really needs to happen if we want to see the high unemployment numbers really begin to come down. And it's incredibly important that we do focus on that area. Looking at the macro perspective economically, we were in here a few weeks ago talking about the Fiscal Stability Bill, but also the Fiscal Advisory Council that was set up with it. And I made a few points then that I'd like to repeat now. And three essential points that I felt stood out to me in the Fiscal Advisory Council's report of September 2012 were, the first, that we should make a bigger correction this year. We're anticipating a 3.5 billion budget correction. There are still a number of corrections to come in the budgets after that. But with the deficit so large, we still remain too exposed to external events. And I think it's necessary to close that deficit as quickly as possible so that we can regain control and make decisions for ourselves again in terms of the economy and what we want to do. And I'd support that assessment by the Fiscal Advisory Council that we should cut more and cut more quickly. The second point that stood out from the report for me was in relation to what options would be considered when framing the budget. And I think that all options should be considered. We should look at everything. We should look at possible tax increases, though I would not agree with that myself, at changes in social welfare that we could make, and other costs that are there that we're not able to look at present. I think it's important to the debate that we see those opportunity costs of keeping a certain policy in place or moving from one policy to another to see what could be gained, or just to see that these are the decisions that we make, and to stand over those decisions, and this is why we make them, because we believe we're getting this from it, and that's why we're deciding to do this on the other page. And so I think that's important. And the third point that the Fiscal Advisory Council report made was in relation to groupthink, and particularly in our assumptions for growth for the coming years. And I think that's quite an important warning, because groupthink, when we talked about what happened in the boom and bust, people said no one saw it coming. In fact, some did, but they weren't listened to because society in general was going in one direction. And what we don't want to see here is groupthink evolving between our Troika partners, our own Department of Finance, the Central Bank, the ECB, because there's a risk that we could be wrong. And that happens, of course, and when it happens, but we want to be prepared for that eventuality in case it does transpire, that our assumptions for growth are not as robust for next year as they are. If we've made a bigger correction in the budget this year, it helps us get past that fact, and that's why those 3 points, I think, link in together. Another piece that I'd like to pick up in relation to the debate we're having today, in relation to the budget that's coming, and it's only a small thing, is in relation to an ethical investment policy for the National Pension Reserve Fund. Currently, at the moment, we don't have such a policy for our fund. We only have it in relation to investment in companies that manufacture cluster munitions. Other countries, for example, Norway, have a very progressive ethical investment policy for their pension fund. It's an extremely successful fund. At the moment, there's about just over 5 billion in the discretionary part of the National Pension Reserve Fund. 10 million of that, which is Irish taxpayers' money, is invested in companies that develop nuclear weapons. And I don't agree with that. I think it is in direct contradiction with our foreign policy, with our history in this area. It's only a small thing. But if the Minister is making any changes to the use of the discretionary fund of the National Pension Reserve Fund, I think he could adopt components of this bill, the Nuclear Weapons Bill, prohibitions of investments that I introduced earlier in this term. He could introduce that quite easily, in fact. It wouldn't be a lot of work. The precedent is already there for the Cluster Munitions Fund. The language is practically the same, or the Cluster Munitions Bill. And we could then adopt that and have a clear ethical investment strategy for the Pension Reserve Fund, and from that, go and build a more robust strategy for ethical investment for the country. This is taxpayers' money in the fund. It's a good fund to have. Unfortunately, a lot of it has now gone into the banks, but the money that does remain, it's important that we invest it properly according to what we believe and what our values are as a nation. If we look then at the banks, and still trying to stay on the macro side of the economy before coming to the budget, there is still a problem with the banks, and that's clear. There is no proper credit market working in the country at the moment, and that's something that we have to keep on focusing our attention on. The government has brought in its own micro-enterprise loan fund scheme, and that's welcome in the current climate, but that really shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't need to do that, and if there was a properly functioning banking market, that wouldn't be necessary. So we have to keep on our attention on getting credit flowing again in the economy and getting it out of the banks. And related to that is when we look at the deposits in the banks from Irish householders. Irish household wealth and deposit in banks and Irish banks is just under 100 billion euro. That's huge. It's huge money. And I don't think the answer is to tax that money, but to release it from the banks, to use some sort of mechanism that we might have at our disposal, be it a certain taxation policy or an investment scheme policy, to get people taking that money out of the banks. They're not making any money in the banks because of inflation and because interest rates are so low. They're actually losing money. To get them spending it in the economy again, in their local town, or investing in a small business, or a small loan to a friend who's trying to do something, whatever it may be. It's not huge amounts for a small number of people. It's actually a lot of people have money. A lot of people are saving. And we need to get confidence back to them again in the economy so they can start spending that. And that's where the stimulus comes from in the domestic economy. It's the 100 billion on deposit owned by Irish people. Getting that out of the banks is where the stimulus comes from. I think that's key. As a general point on taxes, again, it relates to that point. I think we should be keeping taxation as low as possible for as many people as possible. This is where we've got to give the responsibility to the people to spend the money as I think is best, to let them spend it in the economy, whether they be investing in something, buying something, consuming. And I think that applies to both, thank you, Chair, VAT that we level on services, to the corporation tax rate, and to income tax rate, so people can spend the money as they see fit and spend it in the economy. There's a number of just the smaller points that I wanted to make, and I'll make them quite quickly, Chair, because my time is running up. But in relation to the property tax, I've already corresponded with the Minister on my thoughts on the property tax and how it might look. But I think it's important when we bring in new taxes, as we will in the coming budget, that we give some certainty around the duration for that tax and the cost of that tax for that period. So if we're bringing in a property tax next year, that we would say, well, this is going to be the amount and it's going to be fixed for a period of, say, 3 to 5 years, so people can have that certainty. Again, it's about giving them confidence in their own situation, as we want confidence in the national economy, so they'll spend that money again. I think the VAT decrease that we introduced as part of our first jobs plan has been very successful. I think we should extend it. I think we should broaden it out to other sectors of society. I think we should keep taxes for employment as low as possible. We want jobs to be created, and that's important. Enterprise investment schemes. We have a number of schemes running at the moment, and they're good, but it's a little bit complicated for people to use. And in fact, the upper amount is about 30% that a person could get back through the system. In the UK, they have an enterprise investment scheme that operates it at 50%. So thereby, if someone was deciding to invest €10,000 in a company or in a friend's enterprise or in the local business, they get €5,000 back. Thank you, Chair, and I'll communicate the rest of my points to the Minister in correspondence. Thank you.